So I'm going to talk about knots, and I'm not going to talk about how to tie knots because I only know how to tie one knot, and it's the wrong one. So I'm mostly going to talk about how to untangle things. Oops, it's a bit loud. Sorry about that. Anyway, much of this talk I'm going to be using my own software, NotPlot, which I developed about 20 years ago, and it's kind of a course project that got out of control. And so the first thing I want to show you, so these are the kind of knots that I'm going to talk about in mathematics. So you can see that they are closed up, not open-ended knots like you have in everyday knots. And there's two different kinds here, and then I have a third one here. And it might be obvious that there's no way that you're going to convert one of these guys into any of the other two without breaking it somehow. You have to snap it open and then reconnect it. So what I'm going to first show you is that there is a way to create, can't see my mouse. Okay, this is not an ad for an Apple product here, and it says that a $100 mouse, which tends to lose Bluetooth connection in a very important time. So I apologize for that. I'll try my best without a mouse. So the first thing I want to show you is how are we going to make a knot in NotPlot. Now, so this thing. First of all, what I want to do is just show you that the knots in this software are kind of like Tinker Toy models. And as I mentioned with these example knots, two knots are considered to be different knots in the mathematics world if you can't convert one into the other without breaking it somehow. So what I want to do first is actually sketch a knot. And so what I want to do is do something kind of irregular, maybe go under here, go under again, and then under again. And then we have something we've constructed. Now, what I want to do to simplify this thing is apply sort of forces between the yellow beads, kind of a repulsive force, and along the blue sticks, kind of attractive spring force. So if I do that, and turn on you'll see some force vectors very briefly. The thing will relax into just a round unknot. So that means that the thing I started with is the same knot type as this thing, the unknot, the simplest unknotted knot. So now let me do something a little bit more complicated and get rid of this thing. This time I want to go under and then say over and then under, maybe an extra loop here for good measure. And then I want to apply the same forces to this thing. It's kind of a regular, ugly kind of looking object. And it very quickly relaxes. The forces balance. What happens here is that the asymmetry in the geometry kind of decays away. And there was an intrinsic, implicit, or maybe that's not the right word, topological symmetry. So topology is the branch of mathematics which is kind of below geometry. It doesn't need a position in space. All that's important is connectedness, adjacencies, and things like that. So I started with something which is quite messy, and after the relaxation, the balancing of forces, I end up with a beautiful trefoil shape with perfect geometrical symmetry. So this was my thesis work involved something called interactive topological drawing. And the idea was that a designer could create objects with wonderful symmetries and smooth curves without having any knowledge about how to put anything in actual three-dimensional space. So I'm going to touch on several different topics. I've kind of started with mathematics, and I don't want to spend too much time on the mathematics because it's a very, very deep subject. And but if you want to ask me questions later, I'd be happy to answer. But you know now that I've mentioned the fundamental problem in knot theory, or mathematical knot theory, is when is a knot knotted or not? So this object is this object is one of this type or this type of knot. This is the unknot, this is the trefoil, and this guy is one of those. So it's a good mental exercise to think about which one it might be. But also there's another companion one. You see there's just one small crossing change there near the upper right. So one of these is the trefoil, one of them is the unknot. And I'm going to take votes. Who thinks that this one is the trefoil? Who thinks that this one is this knot? Okay, who thinks that this one is this knot? Okay, well, let's find out. So it turns out that that was an unknot, and a little bit counterintuitive, and so these problems can be kind of tricky. So if we pull that one string through, just pull it through, and then relax this one, we end up getting the trefoil knot. And that beautiful deformation you see is nothing more than the balancing of forces, sort of simulated physics. Probably all know that DNA is a twisted double helix. It's very, very long. There are a lot of twists in it. And it replicates by unzipping, basically. And if you imagine you take a strip of paper and twist it 100 million times and then cut it down the middle, those two resulting strips of paper will be horribly tangled. Horribly tangled, far worse than any extension cord has ever been tangled. In fact, this is an electron micrograph of human chromosome number 12. And in terms of, I haven't talked about what's called crossing number, but that's a parent number of crossings you see in a knot diagram. This is about 14 million crossings in a human chromosome. And this is a knot plot knot, which is about 12,000 crossings. And these two strings are actually open-ended. So if I gave you this as an artifact and told you your job is to untangle these two strings, you would not really like me very much. And in fact, how does DNA get out of its horrible tangled mess that it's in every single time a cell divides? And in fact, so my talk is titled Why Knots, and really it should be called Why Not Knots. Why not? You don't want knots because knots in DNA are lethal. Knots in DNA cause old age and death. And so DNA has to somehow magically untangle. And again, I just have to be very brief about this. The way it does it is, well, let's imagine this entire room is filled with a tangling extension cord and your task is to untangle it. Wouldn't you love to have an operation where you could take two wires or strands and just have it pass through itself? Because you know when you're untangling extension cords, you do a lot of pulling strings through, and it's very tedious and very energy consuming. So DNA doesn't work like that. The way it works is that there actually are enzymes, and they're called topoisomerases. And these topoisomerases, they do exactly that. They do a strand passage, they break the DNA, let the DNA pass through, and they rebuild it, usually perfectly. And then just to give you an idea of how often this is happening in your body right now, there's estimated that there's about 1 billion of these strand passages that happen for every human cell that divides. Say 1,000 seconds per cell division, I'm not exactly sure. That's 1 million per second per cell that's dividing in your body. Now, we don't really know this, but say there's 10 to 100 trillion cells in your body. 3 to 10% maybe are undergoing replication any time. That's several 100 trillion of these operations of strand passage that are happening in your body right now and all the time. So, of course, this is a perfect way that mutations can happen, and luckily most cells that undergo mutations will probably die. So anyways, my colleagues mostly at San Francisco State University and the University of Iowa, we've studied highly idealized computer simulations using NotPlot on one mechanism of how this untangling may actually work, how the enzyme might actually operate, because it's very small. It doesn't see the large tangled picture, so it has to have some local geometric information that helps it get things untangled. And the other place in nature where knots are extremely important are in astronomy, actually, and this is just intended to be these twisting bands are, remember when you were kids, you had those little rubber band and airplanes that you wound up a rubber band and there was a propeller. If you overwound the rubber band, the band could break, and the worst thing that could happen, it might take your eye out or something like that. Now these two strands here, it's a very kind of crude graphical illustration of what might be happening on the surface of the sun. And so this is an image from the SOHO satellite. It's in extreme ultraviolet. The sun doesn't look like this invisible light. But watch what happens. You'll see sort of those arches you see are plasmas that are following magnetic field lines. And because of the sun's way of differential rotation, these field lines tend to get tangled and they get overwound, just like the rubber band airplane. And at some point, they break and reconnect. And during that break, they can release an enormous amount of energy. Now, the reason why this is a concern, and there are satellites which are constantly watching the sun at all times, is because one of these kinds of events could take down civilization. Just by, for example, if an extreme event, some studies have shown that an extreme event of a solar eruption could, in just the United States alone, take up to 40 million people could lose power for up to 2 years, which is a really bad thing. So anyway, that's more details if you're interested. Ask me later. And so I want to kind of switch to I'm going to skip the part about bacteriophages, but I want to actually talk a little bit about dancers, robots, and electrons. And for this, I actually need a volunteer from the audience. Can everybody hear me without the mic? Yeah. Is that okay? One of the things that fascinates me about mathematics is that mathematics is really the study of pattern. And pattern is, I don't mean by pattern, I don't mean a geometrical pattern, but I mean the same kind of formal motif or pattern that occurs in different places. And so I need a volunteer, but you don't have to do much. I'm snagged, I'm tangled. Does anybody have any topoisomerase? Okay, I think that's okay there, like that. So all the volunteer has to do is hold two ends of a string. Oh, actually, I'm not ready for the volunteer yet. So, this is the first time I've ever given a talk where people are actually drinking alcohol. So, and thankfully you're a nice group. But there's a certain dance form in I think Balinese and Filipino dance forms. Maybe there's some dancers in the audience who might know this better, but it involves having a glass of wine on your hand, on the dancer's hand. And the dancer is very flexible, and they move their hand in such a way that they rotate the hand through 180 degrees, 360, one full turn. Now, if you just imagine a spotlight on my hand, and if I was a lot more flexible, you might just think my configuration of my body has come back to where it started after one full turn. But actually, no, after two full turns, only then does my body actually come back to its initial conformation. So a real Balinese dancer, or other flexible dancers, can do that without really moving their hand much, just rotating it. So I want to show you something involving this, what I call a quaternion demonstrator. And so my volunteer, all you have to do is hold the two ends and fairly taut, hold them apart a little bit, not too much though, just like about the same as this. Step out of the light. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to tangle these strings by doing two half twists, so one full twist, so the strings are tangled. And my question is it possible for me to untangle these strings without rotating either ends? Now, you can't move your strings. I'm allowed to move the plate, but I'm not allowed to rotate it. So can I untangle them? No. Okay, what if I make it more tangled? Two full twists. Is it now possible to untangle the strings without rotating either ends, either the plate or what? Well, let's see. What if we, no, I can't cheat here. I'm not going to pass the plate through that. That would be cheating. And I'm just going to move like this. I'm not rotating the plate. And there, they're untangled. So no, just keep holding. So maybe you may see that there's the same pattern here. There's this double rotation is the thing that actually brings it back to its initial conformation of an articulated figure or a robot. Here, one full twist doesn't untangle, 2 full twists will be untangleable. What about 3 full twists? No? How about 4 full twists? Yeah. The audience is very smart. So there's one set untangled, and then that's it. So, thank you very much. So that's kind of curious, and it's the same mathematical pattern happening in dancers, robots, tangled braids, and in electrons. Now, we actually have a particle physicist in the audience, but I won't ask you to explain how this same pattern appears in electron spin. That's it takes a little bit of time. Anyway, but let's just say it does, right, Vera? Okay, so now I want to switch more to traditional art. I'm not sure how over time I am, but I'll try and be fast. So I'm interested in knots in many different forms, and one of them is just knots used as cultural or spiritual symbols. There's a long history of this. This is an example of Roman mosaic knot work, and you see what looks very much like a mathematical knot there, closed ends. But probably the best example of beautiful, elaborate artwork in knots is the Celtic knot work. This one particular example is from Linden's Foreign Gospels. This is a book dating from roughly 700, and it's completely filled with these amazing, intricate knot diagrams. But probably more widely known as the Book of Kells, which is a little bit younger, about 800. And if you've never seen the Book of Kells, basically Linden's Foreign Gospels and the Book of Kells are essentially the main 2 sources for all Celtic art that we know. There's a few others, but they're the primary ones. Many things have been lost. And the UBC library has a wonderful facsimile edition of the Book of Kells. And it's probably one of the most treasured collections. They watch you very carefully when you look at it. Anyway, it has all kinds of fabulous knot work, knotted cats, really incredible stuff. So I don't have time to really get through this. However, I do want to show you what's been called sort of the secret of the scribes. Most of these, or all of these illuminated manuscripts were done by scribes in very damp, wet conditions and over many years, because they had a lot of spare time on their hands. But I do want to show you kind of one secret of how they may have gotten some of these amazing diagrams. Now, this secret I learned from artist who, or not drawer, who actually lives in Vancouver, Aiden Meehan. And it involves starting with a plaque that looks like this. And essentially what you do is you place what are called break line patterns. So I'm going to put a break line right here, then another one here, and maybe one down here. Anyway, you can see that this is a slightly tedious operation, but you can eventually get what are starting to somewhat look like Celtic knot diagrams. So, and you can copy that into the main area and oops. So anyway, that's sort of one of the secrets. Now, of course, these don't look anything as nearly as amazing as the ones that you would find in the Book of Kells. And one other thing that this is kind of, when I was looking through the facsimile, I was interested in primarily the minutiae the small knot diagrams. And this is a very curious thing that I found. I took a picture of it. And this is in a book that was written around, or illustrated around 800. And what it shows is what looks like an illustration of DNA undergoing replication. And there's a twisted double helix there. And the geometry is about right in the size of the base pairs. And if you actually count the number of little ladder rungs per full twist, there's about 10, which is about right for DNA. So this could be an illustration of the duplex nature of DNA about 1100 years before that nature was actually discovered. So trouble is it's left-handed DNA. So our DNA is right-handed DNA. It twists like this. This DNA is twisting like that. I guess it's alien DNA or something like that. And also, I'm wearing a Leonardo shirt, and I think Leonardo is, in some ways, a great role model for all scientists and artists. He was a person who would have thought of the distinction between science and art as ridiculous. And thank you for the Curiosity Collider to bringing this idea forefront that we're all people, scientists and artists, are all motivated by curiosity. They all are fascinated by the world and its structures in it. And this is a knot that is attributed to Leonardo. And I put forward the possibility that Leonardo may have been the first person in history who looked at knots as a mathematical object. In fact, there's some evidence that Leonardo was a member of a knot cult. And so this is a very elaborate knot illustration. And also Albrecht Dürer, can never pronounce his name properly, he also, shortly after Leonardo, and they did overlap in time by quite a bit, shortly after and probably copied after Leonardo's piece, he may have been a member of the same cult. And anyway, he did a whole series of these knot diagrams, which are all very beautiful. So I guess my time is up, and I'm happy to take questions. And thanks again to Curiosity Collider for allowing me to present to you, and thank you to Café du Soleil. And